Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. We discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we are going to be talking about everything free agency related, including a sprinkle of some NBA draft in there, because we are kicking off the NBA free agency period today at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm excited, and I know you guys are as well. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So the Orlando Magic are doing everything under the sun to create as much cap flexibility as humanly possible, or at least do their best to make sure that they're staying underneath of the second apron. And they most recently made a move that involved cutting a little bit of salary just to kind of make things a little bit more flexible. Granted, still not a whole lot of flexibility outside of that mid-level exception. They do have the full mid-level exception, but that's just about it. But they did something cap strap wise that will help them a little bit, and that was declining the club option of both Mo Wagner and Caleb Houston, both two Michigan alumni drafted by the Orlando Magic with the anticipation of having more athleticism, wing depth. Caleb Houston also brings some real three-point shooting, and both these guys are produced in a real way. Mo Wagner was going to be picked up for a club option of $11 million. Caleb Houston was set for about $2 million. This puts them in a position to maybe renegotiate that for a much lower number, maybe give them another 2 years with a player option or another 2 years with a club option. Maybe it's a 3-year deal flat, but just get that number down a little bit, given the fact that both of these guys have not necessarily produced at a high level. Caleb Houston has shown flashes of good signs as a three-point shooter, but hasn't necessarily got enough burn on both sides of the ball as a player that you think could be like a long-term rotation piece, but is a guy that definitely fits what the Orlando Magic are trying to do. And Mo Wagner, obviously the older brother of Franz Wagner, and a guy who did bring a lot of injury prior to his ACL injury that only made it where he played 30 games last year. His future is in limbo, but I think as long as you're a brother of one of the star players on the team, paired with the fact that he was a productive offensive player when healthy, both of these guys are probably going to get brought back up, because at the end of the day, the Orlando Magic also have both of these guys birds rights, which makes them top options for them going into free agency as guys that they can prioritize, but also guys that they can get on a very team-friendly number. So expect Mo Wagner and Caleb Houston to likely still be on this team going into next season. I don't think they're going anywhere, but it is important to factor in that the Orlando Magic do realize how cap-strapped they have become with the Desmond Bane trade paired with the Paolo Banchero extension that's coming around the corner. And those two things put together led to the need to do something like shed this almost 13 or just about over $13 million over two players that, again, are going to be in the rotation next year, but not necessarily guys that should be eating up the last little bit of real cap flexibility that you have. Another guy who's going to be a big-time contributor for them, hopefully in some real way next season, is Noah Pinda, who they drafted at number 32 overall in this this past NBA draft. And this is a guy who in Eurobasket over in France has just been able to produce at a real high level. He's a guy who played in the All-Star team over there, and a dude who just was able to really thrive in one of the more difficult overseas leagues where nothing is given to you and the competition up there is one of the highest that it can be outside of the NBA. He averaged 11.7 points, 8.6 rebounds, and 3 assists. And this is a guy who just kind of fits a lot of the different things that the Orlando Magic are trying to do. Obviously, big wing, ball handler, flexibility as a guy who can potentially be a floor spacer, a dude who can also put himself in a position to guard multiple positions, just given the fact that he has a very solid size, standing at 6'7" and has a near 7-foot wingspan. He also weighs at almost 242. So, this is a guy who has the real possibility of being like a jumbo wing type, similar to Franz Wagner, similar to Paolo Banchero, as this ball-handling wing type that can just create for himself, operate in the pick and roll, and still be able to get to his shots. He's a guy who's dangerous downhill. I think this is a dude who off the bench could be a really good free throw merchant, as well as a guy who just likes to create as much contact as possible and use his burly size to be able to get to the basket at will. He's a really, really good finisher, very strong finisher, and definitely your athletic type. That's going to be a guy that can do a lot around the rim, both offensively and defensively. They got a guy who I think Noah Pinda, to a lot of people, could be considered a dude who just barely fell out of the first round, but really could have been like a top 20 pick in this draft class. Obviously, the overseas crop was kind of a mixed bag this year, but Noah Penda is a guy that all the measurables and the talent on tape says that this was a guy who could have been in your, like, your early 20s, if not maybe like your late teens, just given the kind of production that he had in a very strong league. So the fact that they were able to get him at 32, paired with what they were able to do, obviously, at the back half of the 20s with Jace Richardson, they were able to add real three-point shooting and continue this philosophy of adding positional versatility and just continuing to have real jumbo ball handling wings across this roster. And that's big for a team like this because of the fact that, honestly, they need as many guys that can create as humanly possible. One of the biggest things that hurt them in the postseason, both against the Celtics and in the series against Cleveland, more prominent in the series against Cleveland 2 seasons ago, was the fact that it was either Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero. And in the series against Cleveland, it was really more Paolo Banchero than anybody else. They need as many guys as humanly possible to be able to dribble, pass, shoot. The philosophy of the Orlando Magic has to be something where you take into consideration what the Celtics have done, what the Indiana Pacers have done, what the Oklahoma City Thunder are doing, right? The Oklahoma City Thunder are going to become the new gold standard, right? The new copycat league. Everybody tries to figure out how to mimic the formula, right? That's going to be something that comes up. And the biggest thing that always shows up when you talk about OKC or even the Toronto Raptors, who are going down this path now, is having a bunch of jumbo 6'7" type guys that can dribble, pass, shoot at a high level or just have really high IQ. Obviously, right, Desmond Bane and Jalen Suggs don't fit that mold, but they're the guys that can dribble, pass, shoot, and more specifically can shoot that three ball at a very high clip, something that the Toronto Raptors, for example, don't have as favorable to. So Noah Penda, I wouldn't say he's a perfect prospect, but he's a guy that definitely falls in that basket of what the Orlando Magic have been like used to grabbing in both the first and second round over the last couple of years. We talked about the draft philosophy of the Orlando Magic last episode for Friday, and it's kind of continuing. It's less shown through the Jace Richardson pick and more through this one, but the Jace Richardson pick also reflects the three-point shooting necessity. So this idea of either three-point shooting or jumbo wings, it's going to continue to go down that path, and I think that it's the right way for them to continue to go, given the fact that this is a team that, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think the only thing that's really hurt this team over the last couple of seasons has more to do with injury history and just not necessarily being the most experienced in terms of the postseason. But this is a team that on paper, talent-wise, is going to go into the Eastern Conference and be a top 3 or 4 team just in terms of their starting 5 alone on paper. And they continue to build off of a philosophy that really works. And we've seen just this past season with the Oklahoma City Thunder go and win you a championship. But speaking of jumbo wings, let's talk about Paolo Banchero. Obviously, Paolo is due for an extension, and it's very likely that as soon as the clock strikes 6, he's going to be one of those guys that gets an extension pretty early and often. But there might be a catch-22 with what Paolo Banchero gets. Unlike certain superstar rookie extensions we've seen in the past, where they get a 4-year with a player option, or it's a 5-year deal with a player option at the end for like a 6th season, there's a likelihood that Paolo Banchero will end up having a straight 5-season deal. We've seen this in the past in a handful of different iterations, including his teammate Franz Wagner, who signed a Supermax rookie extension that was also just a flat 5-year deal. We saw John Morant sign an extension where there was no player option on the end of it as well. It was very team friendly, and the likelihood is that Paolo Banchero will end up doing something very similar. This is very favorable to an Orlando Magic team that obviously needs to have as much control around their finances as humanly possible, given the fact that they are pretty much locked into the group that they have right now, give or take a few different player possibilities that they can use with, again, trades we've talked about in the past that involve Wendell Carter Jr., Goga Batazde, and Jonathan Isaac to free up more potential cap space. But even if they do that, that core 4 they have is going to be the bulk of their salary cap moving forward. So they have to do anything they can on the margins to at least make sure that they maintain team flexibility within the roster construction, and having straight deals instead of player options is so team friendly that it makes things work in their favor. And again, in these situations as well, if the player outperforms the contract, guess what? By year 4, going into year 5, they'll already be in contract negotiations to potentially do another extension for another 2-3 years. We saw that with Damian Lillard, where he's entering, that portion of his extension with the Trailblazers where, there's going to be a point where Damian Lillard's earning $70 million in a single season because he re-upped on a deal where he still had 2 more seasons left on the contract and then got a contract extension for 2 more seasons on top of that. There's a high likelihood that something like that could happen with Paulo Banchero as well. So no need to necessarily be nervous, but I will say that this is something that works both for the Magic and for Banchero in a way in terms of just trying to build around him as well, having that flexibility. But at the end of the day, Paulo Banchero just has to play up to the contract. That's going to be the most important thing. But this is a new normal within the league, especially with the fact that teams are having to be a lot more strict about what they do with their money, given the fact that when you build these quote-unquote super teams or when you invest this much money into a core group of guys, you have to have as much of the control in that investment as humanly possible because you get put in positions like Kevin Durant with the Phoenix Suns where you could get really put in a bad position by losing the grip on what flexibility you do have with player contracts and things of that nature. So Paulo Banchero, I think, will be one of the first extensions we hear here later on today or on Tuesday. And I think that it'll be one that he will most likely like, but I think one that the Orlando Magic will also very much be thankful for. Lastly, we're going to end the podcast with who I believe all the news points to as the Orlando Magic's top free agent target. Orlando has the full mid-level exception, and they are positioned to be able to take one significantly big swing. They're going to have about $14 to $15 million to go with, and the player that it seems like everything is pointing towards is Nickeil Alexander-Walker of the aforementioned or from the Minnesota Timberwolves. He's a guy who's going to be a high commodity as a dude who can play on both sides of the ball at a premium position, 6'4", 6'5", able to shoot the three ball at a high clip. I think he shot 37 to 38% from three in his time with the Timberwolves. He's a guy who's going to be able to help stretch the floor. He can be interchangeable next to Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, Anthony Black. You can do all of those different things. He can play next to Jace Richardson as well. He's going to be able to step in and also because he has real on-ball ball handling chops. He's a guy who was known as a scorer coming out of Virginia Tech initially, and one of my favorite prospects out of that draft class as well, because I thought he had the ability to potentially be a combo guard that had high upside as a defender as well, right? So I think Alexander Walker is a really good top target, and I think especially when seeing guys like Colin Sexton recently get traded to the Charlotte Hornets, these point guards are going to get plucked off the free agency market real fast, and the guys you would think to go off there in the trade market, we've already seen some point guard movement, right? Lonzo Ball's going to be on the Cleveland Cavaliers. I just mentioned Colin Sexton, who's going to be going to Charlotte. These point guards are going to move quickly. So I think that the Orlando Magic cannot waste any time in terms of jumping on getting a contract to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. If he's the guy, you go ahead and lock that down as quickly as humanly possible. You do not want to be in a weird situation where you potentially are in a back and forth bidding war with a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves, who I think with the most recent signings of both Naz Reid and Julius Randle will likely have to let Nickeil Alexander walk. I think you take advantage of that opportunity, hop on it, sign him, round out your backcourt, understand that your front court is pretty much solidified, maybe move off Goga Batazde for maybe a more established center, or see if you can get a player like Clint Capella or the most recently announced player who might be on the open market due to a buyout in DeAndre Ayton as a flyer. That could be a really interesting option with the last little bit of money you may have. But other than that, shore up your backcourt with that depth of Anthony Black, Desmond Bane, Jalen Suggs, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Pair that with Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr. Boom, you're already in a really good position right there in terms of just your main 7 to 8 guys. I mean, that would be an A+ free agency move for them. You pair that with Jace Richardson. You pair that with Noah Penda. And I would say like offseason for the Orlando Magic, who are taking real advantage of a summer going into a season where the Eastern Conference is as wide open as it ever has been. But with that being said, this is the end of this episode of the Magic Latest Podcast. I will catch you guys again tomorrow for more updates around the Magic. But until then, peace.